Values, as we talked through the past discussion, are the guiding principles of our behavior. Our values determine what we consider to be right, wrong, fair, unfair, good, or evil. A person's values are indicative of their character. Similarly, at an organizational level, values reflect the ethics and principles of the business. Therefore, it is important to learn the influence as well as the impact of our values on our decision-making process. Values are principles, morals, standards, and ideals that we consider dear and precious in our life. What is valued denotes something significant, something to be appreciated. Our value system is shaped by our culture or way of life, as people's values collectively shape the culture, if not immediately, then in the future. And for today's discussion, we will be able to know these three topics, mainly the ambivalent values, double standard mentality, and the false norms of morality. And now, let us start with ambivalent values and answer the question, what is ambivalent personality? Ambivalence is a state in which you lack certainty or the ability to make decisions. Psychology defines ambivalence or detached personality as a state of having simultaneous contradictory reactions, beliefs, or feelings towards some person, object, or state of facts. Ambivalence happens when we are in a situation of having inconsistent reactions, thoughts, or attitudes towards someone. Meaning, ambivalence occurs when a person experiences mental disagreement or disconnection when they have both a good and negative feeling regarding the same individual. It will emerge when two or more goals valued by an individual are in conflict regarding the same emotional matter. An example of ambivalence is struggling with whether to invite someone to an event because she has a positive relationship with you but not with the other attendees. Moral ambivalence is the experience of simultaneous feelings of moral approval and moral disapproval about the same choice, action, or policy. Moral ambivalence arises when the behaviors, attitudes, and norms that are shaped and maintained by an individual conflict with behaviors, attitudes, and norms congruent with the ethical values and judgment of someone. Moral ambivalence typically arises when a moral agent confronts an action which satisfies some of her moral values or principles, while at the same time conflicts with other moral values or principles that she also endorses. For example, Samantha lies to her parents to protect her best friend. Samantha experiences moral ambivalence because she values honesty and disapproves deception, but she also values loyalty to her friends. On this practical occasion, Samantha's moral values are in conflict. As a result, she considers her action to be both morally wrongful and morally admirable. Filipino values are ambivalent in the sense that, depending on how they are interpreted, practiced, or performed, they have the potential to be good or bad, a benefit or an obstacle to personal and national development. They can be utilized for good or for evil. At this point, to further understand the ambivalent values, let us take a look at these Filipino traits and values showing ambivalence. The ambivalence of Filipino traits and values that we are going to ascertain today are as follows. First, the utang na loob or the debt of gratitude, hiya or the shyness or the shame, and the ningaskugon or the procrastination. Utang na loob or the debt of gratitude. On the positive side, it recognizes one's indebtedness. This trait portrays the spirit behind the Filipino kapwa orientation of shared personhood or shared self, which is at the core of the Filipino value system. On the other hand, the negative side, one overlooks moral principles when one is indebted to a person. One who is beholden to another person will do anything to please him, thinking that by doing so, he is able to repay a debt. One condones what the other person does and will never condemn him for wrongdoing. Utang na loob means reciprocity, indebtedness, gratefulness, or honoring gratitude. It passed through and influences all aspects of the Filipino life, including in business, education, politics, morality, and religion. Filipinos always recognize one's indebtedness. This means that he owed to a person who has helped him through the trials he had undergone. He repays that person in whatever kind, whatever time and situation. It is one way of showing deep appreciation for lending out a hand. The essence of utang na loob is an obligation to appropriately repay a person who has done one a favor. The favors which bring out the Filipinos' sense of utang na loob are typically those whose value is impossible to quantify, or, if there is a quantifiable value, involves a deeply personal internal dimension. This internal dimension, the loob, differentiates utang na loob from an ordinary debt. Being an internal phenomenon, utang na loob thus goes much deeper than an ordinary debt. A grateful client will not stop at simply paying his or her due, or expressing appreciation for help received. One is pressured to do something extra like give a gift to the doctor, the government staff, or a kind neighbor. This sense of gratitude is especially intense among the poor who offer to pay back in any way. This is where opportunists thrive. The exploitation of utang na loob has been linked to practically every evil in the Philippine society, including the continuance of smuggling syndicates and ongoing political government corruption. Any feeling of indebtedness can be used by a politician or a businessman to take excessive compensation, usually in the form of hidden services. It can be so compulsive, making one turn a blind eye to the ethics. Next one is the shyness, shame, or hiya. On the positive side, it contributes to peace of mind and lack of stress by not even trying to achieve. On the other hand, on the negative side, it arrests or inhibits one's action. This trait reduces one's smallness or to the morality of slaves, thus setting the soul of the Filipino and emasculating him, making him timid, meek, and weak. Literally, it has several meanings, such as shy, timid, sensitive, rather than ashamed. Filipinos believe they must live up to the accepted standards of behavior and make it to a point not to cause another person's embarrassment. Each is anticipated to have hiya in the way they behave to win respect from the community. This is a value that gives a Filipino a sense of social decency and politeness. Hiya is the currency applied within the society, controlling and motivating a person's social behavior. This is the reason why a vast majority of Filipinos still remain conservative in their actions in the modern age. Everyone is expected to have hiya in the way they behave in order to win respect from the community. Dressing cleanly, being friendly, and living up to your word are good ways avoiding hiya. When we interact with our colleagues from other cultures, we tend to feel inferior because of our ethnic background. We think other cultures are better than us. Kapag mahiyain tayo at hindi tayo nagsasalita, sa isip natin alam natin ang gagawin. Pero nauunahan tayo ng hiya. Lumalabas, hindi mo na alam ang gagawin mo. Matataranta ka, kakabahan ka at hindi ka mapapakali. Embracing yourself and recognizing your skills will help you boost your confidence in your abilities. If you feel comfortable about yourself and you are confident about your skill set, people will know and they will respect you for it. The third Filipino trait and value showing ambivalence is the ningas-kugon. Ningas-kugon or the procrastination is the attitude when we start something with interest and enthusiasm, Then after a very short time, we lose interest and stop whatever it is we are doing. Ningaskugon is lack sustained perseverance. It also means a tendency among individuals to start a new venture or task with too much enthusiasm and effort, but after some time will take a pause or will suddenly stop working, until such time that they lose interest in the tasks, leaving things incomplete, just like a wildfire burning out too quickly. So, the metaphor Ningaskugon was coined to mean projects, promises, or decisions that were started on a high note but immediately stopped or were left unfinished. Ningaskugon has negative effects in life, and these are: first, you won't able to finish everything on time. You will always be cramming and might have unwanted results and unbearable mistakes because of hurrying. Also, you might become lazy and unreliable, and people will see this as a hindrance to connecting with you. And lastly, you're bound to waste material, efforts, and time. To overcome Ningaskugon mentality, try to give and accept more compliments and encouragements. This is to avoid hopelessness, rather give strength and enthusiasm to finish what has been started. Avoid starting a goal or project if you know in yourself that you cannot finish it. Moreover, be aware of the consequences of Ningaskugon mentality and reflect on this. At last, you can also ask help from somebody else. Ambivalent values are likely just an extension of the ambivalence in human nature. They cannot be taken out by taking out the values. For a culture to be tolerable and effective, there ought to be check and balance. Other values could limit the excessive, unbounded, or the compulsive observation of certain values. The use of katwiran could help Filipinos who tend to be subjective, the use of objective moral standards to ensure rationality. It could supplement kabutihang loob or kagandahang loob, a traditional belief that relies on an internal compass, presupposing goodness of human being. In relating with the family and others, several traditional values could give in establishing personal boundaries, mapagkilatis or being observant, or mapagmasid or being aware, ought to bring back objectivity in dealings and relationships. Pagiging totoo o truthfulness could mitigate undue advances and abuses from others. And pagkikipagkapwa-tao presumes the self is as important as the family and others. Simultaneously, valuing the family, God, self, and others, if founded on kagandahang loob and guided by makatwirang loob and the other suggested norms in relating, is expected to result to a more coherent and humane Filipino culture, where everyone shares and no one is sacrificed. And now, we will go to the double standard mentality. Double standard mentality defines as an ethical or moral code or set of principles containing different provisions from one group of people than for another. A double standard is a code or policy that favors one group of person over another. It's like having a rule that applies to some people one way and another way to the others. Essentially, this means that double standard occurs when two or more things, such as individuals or groups, are treated differently when they should be treated the same way. A standard is a way of evaluating someone. A double standard is two-faced. A double standard is a principle or policy that is applied in different manner to similar things without proper justification. This happens especially an unwritten code of sexual behavior permitting men more freedom than women. Another, men getting paid more for the same work than women is a double standard. Anytime some are held to a higher standard than others, there is a double standard because everyone isn't being treated fairly. That means that double standards are unfair and can be applied by individuals or groups, generally toward other individuals or groups. Examples of what double standard can look like in any of these situations includes an individual applying double standards toward individuals, an individual applying double standards toward groups, a group applying double standards toward individuals, or a group applying double standards toward groups. First, an individual applying double standard toward individuals can involve, for example, a parent applying double standards toward their children by treating similar behavior in an entirely different manner based on which kid did it. Next, an individual applying double standard toward groups can involve, for example, a manager applying double standards toward employees by discriminating during the hiring process based on factors such as gender or race. Third one is the group applying double standard toward individuals. This involves, for example, a media company applying double standard toward an activist by attacking them for behavior that they praised in different activists earlier on. The last one is the group applying double standard toward groups. Can involve, for example, a government applying double standards toward politicians as a whole by being overly lenient toward them when it comes to criminal prosecution compared to the treatment of regular citizens. When double standards are applied with regard to a particular trait, this is sometimes reflected in a way that double standards are referred to. This includes, for example, racial double standards where people from different races are judged or treated differently, as well as gender-based double standards where people of different genders are judged or treated differently, particularly when it comes to sexual behavior and relationships. A phenomenon that is also referred to as sexual double standard happens. The double standard definition states that it is a rule or a principle applied to different people or groups. Here are some of the illustrations that uncover the uncomfortable truth behind some everyday life situations, and it is disturbing how accurate they are. Judging by these images, it is clear that sometimes terms like gender equality are reduced to no more than just a catchphrase. The first image depicts a double standard when it comes to women, specifically to the breastfeeding mother. The cop told the woman she couldn't show off her breasts while breastfeeding her baby because they don't allow women to publicly display their breasts. However, the mall itself displays a large image of a daring woman. This is also an example portraying double standard in terms of physical appearance and clothing standards. To determine whether something constitutes a double standard, you should determine whether there is an equal treatment involved, and whether there is a proper justification for such treatment. To deal with the use of double standards, you can use various techniques, such as asking the person applying the double standard to explain the rationale behind their behavior, or asking them how would they feel if someone else applied similar double standard towards them. At this point, let us move on our last topic, which is the defective norms of morality and its classes, which are hedonism, utilitarianism, moral rationalism, moral positivism, moral evolutionism, moral sensism, and the moral philosophy of communism. Let us start with hedonism, which is an ethical theory which holds the supreme end of man consists in the acquisition of pleasure, and that actions are good or bad according to whether they give or do not give pleasure or temporal happiness to man. Here, morality is based or grounded on pleasure or satisfaction that acts or brings. The good action is the pleasant action, and the bad action is what which produces pain or unhappiness. To further understand, let's watch this video.
Hedonism. Hedonism is the belief that pleasure, or the absence of pain, is the most important principle in determining the morality of a potential course of action. Pleasure can be things like sex, drugs, and rock and roll, but it can also include any intrinsically valuable experience, like reading a good book. Hedonism is a type of consequentialism, and it has several forms. For example, normative hedonism is the idea that pleasure should be people's primary motivation. On the other hand, motivational hedonism says that only pleasure and pain cause people to do what they do. Egotistical hedonism requires a person to consider only his or her own pleasure in making choices. Conversely, altruistic hedonism says that the creation of pleasure for all people is the best way to measure if an action is ethical. Regardless of the type of hedonism, critics fault it as a guide for morality because hedonism ignores all other values, such as freedom or fairness, when evaluating right and wrong.
The next one is the utilitarianism, which is a theory very much similar to hedonism. This norm of morality holds that actions are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness, and wrong as they tend to produce unhappiness. It makes utility the norm of morality. The goodness or badness of an action would depend on the effects or consequences of the action. Good acts give good result. If it works, if it makes you successful, make you attain your goal or the purpose. Bad acts as if does not. Let us take a look at this video to get a better understanding.
Utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is an ethical theory that determines right from wrong by focusing on outcomes. It is a form of consequentialism. Utilitarianism holds that the most ethical choice is the one that will produce the greatest good for the greatest number. It is the only moral framework that can be used to justify military force or war. It is also the most common approach to moral reasoning used in business because of the way in which it accounts for costs and benefits. However, because we cannot predict the future, it's difficult to know with certainty whether the consequences of our actions will be good or bad. This is one of the limitations of utilitarianism. Utilitarianism also has trouble accounting for values such as justice and individual rights. For example, assume a hospital has 4 people whose lives depend upon receiving organ transplants: a heart, lungs, a kidney, and a liver. If a healthy person wanders into the hospital, his organs could be harvested to save 4 lives at the expense of 1 life. This would arguably produce the greatest good for the greatest number, but few would consider it an acceptable course of action, let alone the most ethical one. So, although utilitarianism is arguably the most reason-based approach to determining right and wrong, it has obvious limitations.
Moral rationalism. It is a theory of knowledge which maintains that all knowledge and all truths are derived from the human reason. Human reasons, therefore, is the source of all truths, all laws, and all principles. Human reason is the source of all moral laws and all moral obligations. According to categorical imperative, reason commands and the commands of reason are absolute and unconditional, absolutely binding all men of all times. This means, as applied, we must obey without questioning, demanding absolute obedience. Therefore, good must be done simply because we must, goodness for goodness' sake. So why? According to this theory, we must do good because we must. It is our duty to obey. Moral evolutionism. This theory holds that morality is never fixed or absolute, but is continually changing and evolving gradually into a perfect morality. Friedrich Nietzsche, a German philosopher, believed that morality, the distinction between right or wrong, did not exist in the beginning. Good is that which anybody desired. The belief of moral teachings of Christians on mercy, pity, suffering, poverty, forgiveness, and love glorify and favor the weak and produce weaklings according to this philosopher. In the contrary, he said, the weak has no right from nature to live and should be eliminated in order to give way to aristocracy of the strong. In short, bad is that which is productive of the weak. Moral positivism. This theory holds that the basis or source of all moral laws is the laws of the state. Good is which is in accordance with the laws of the state, and bad is that which is forbidden by the state. Let's take murder as an instance. Murder is always bad, even before there was any state law prohibiting it. Murder is forbidden by law and is wrong because it is clearly violation against human nature. That is moral positivism. It holds that the basis or source of all moral law is the law of the state. The moral sensism. This is an ethical theory which holds that man is endowed with a special moral sense, by virtue or which distinguishes between right and wrong. Here, the basis or source of morality is man's senses, what a person feels about the human act. Good if I feel it is good, and bad if I feel it is bad. The view expressed when we say, he has no sense of morality or no moral taste. In much the same way that our sense of taste can distinguish between sour and sweet, or as a sense of sight distinguishes dark and bright, there is no positive view, though, to show the existence of such moral sense. Therefore, the existence of such sense is gratuitous assumption, which may be gratuitously denied. Moral sensism is simply as word means according to senses. The last one is the moral philosophy of communism. It is a moral philosophy that logical consequence of its metaphysics or the view of reality is known as dialectic materialism. This is founded on the theory of change, evolution, and revolution. According to this theory, what only matters is the reality. After all, norms contribute to social coherence and knowledge of common expectations, which sustain and form identities at both the societal and individual levels. As a result, norm plays a crucial role in determining how well and efficiently social communities function. Human beings need norms to guide and direct their behavior, to provide order and regularity in social relationships, and to make sense of the understanding of each other's action. That concludes my discussion. Thank you for taking time to listen and have a nice day ahead.